For Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor, Matthew Stover said that he wanted to return Star Wars to its pre-Zahn roots, and the book is dedicated to both Alan Dean Foster, who wrote the novelization of A New Hope, as well as the very strange Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and Brian Daley, who wrote the Han Solo adventures. The novel also makes references to characters and events from the new strip comics and the Marvel comics that ran in the 80s. Luke Skywalker, The Shadows of Mindor was originally intended to come out in February of 2008, but was pushed back to October, and then finally was published December 30th, 2008. I bought and read Luke Skywalker and The Shadows of Mindor when it came out because I, for the most part, like Matthew Stover, even if his works do at times get too dark for me, and I also welcome the return of a more swashbuckling era of Star Wars. I remember that I enjoyed it. I obviously kept my hardcover copy, but I didn't really read it again until this year. So first, a brief summary. 6 months after the Battle of Endor, Luke Skywalker has reluctantly accepted command of the Rapid Response Force and been promoted to general. His group in particular is trying to root out the source of a newly risen warlord named Shadow Spawn. And thanks to a trap set by Rogue Squadron, they track Shadow Spawn's forces back to the Tazpan system and the world of Mindor. But the situation is not as it seems. The power behind Shadow Spawn has set a trap, and his target is the young Jedi Skywalker himself. Luke Skywalker in The Shadows of Mindor has a frame story that is in the very beginning and the very end, which is that Luke approaches Inspector Gepton, a character that we first met in Stover's Shatterpoint, and says, "I've committed a war crime. I have killed 50,000 innocent people. I want you to investigate me." And then the story starts. We get the title, we get an opening crawl, and the story is almost entirely the Battle of Mindor. We get a little bit of setup, we see how they track Shadow Spawn's forces, we have Leia doing a little bit of negotiations with some hostile Mandalorian mercenaries, sensing something's wrong with Luke, sending Han off to find out what happens. Han and Chewie jet off in the Falcon. Leia and Rogue Squadron jet off after Han, and then Lando and Finn Shaisa and the rest of the Mandalorians jet off after them. And the bulk of it is that Battle of Mindor, which, yes, culminates in the loss of all the Imperial forces. Luke loses a lot of his people, and the system of Tazpan is destroyed. A lot of books have battles, multiple battles, but I guess I had forgotten how Luke Skywalker, The Shadows of Mindor, is only about the Battle of Mindor. My hardcover copy is a fairly svelte 311 pages. And in fact, we see very little of the fallout of that battle. Where the narrative ends is Luke being rescued by Nick Rostu, and then we get the debriefing conclusion, which is Gepton saying, "Yeah, no, I'm not gonna charge you with anything," and in fact is going to sell this story to a holodrama producer. And as befits a novel which is only about one long extended battle, the cast of characters is also pretty svelte. This time around, I'll start with the little guys and I'll build up to the big ones. We've got members of Rogue Squadron like Wedge Antilles, Wes Jansen, Hobby Clivian, and Tycho Chelchu, who is not a member of Rogue Squadron. He's flying an A-Wing. He's also there with the group. Wes and Hobby have a lot of bantering dialogue. In fact, there's a running gag in the first chapter that Hobby is very accident prone, and that is just like getting stuck in his ship and his prosthetics are being damaged. I'm not sure where the idea that Hobby had multiple prosthetics originated from, because in the X-Wing books he made multiple comments about how he's like a poster child of Bacta, promoted by Bacta. I think, if I'm right, that it came from one of the Tales comics. The Rogues don't have a lot to do here, but I did enjoy seeing them, and especially seeing them help Leia in this way. Lando is still a general. He's working with intelligence. He's brought in to deal with these Mandalorian mercenaries who are not listening to Leia, and he does that by bringing Fen Shaisa, who is the Mandalore. I like this because this was a moment of bringing the Marvel comic into it. And while Stover said he was trying to pay tribute, especially to Brian Daley's Han Solo adventures, a lot of the Shadows of Mindor feels very Marvel comic-like to me. I love how Lando takes a situation that has been brewing for several days, the Mandalorian's not listening to Leia at all, and he basically diffuses it in a moment. And it's not even the fact that he brought in Fen Shaisa, but he's basically like, oh, okay, really, you want to hold on to this planet? How are the Imperials going to pay you? But I can pay you for another job. That just felt exceptionally Lando to me, that even in his role as an intelligence general, that he is still very much the businessman who can, like, cut down to the nitty-gritty and be like, hey, really? You want to do this? Because this is much more profitable. I also like Han here, who is told that Leia has a bad feeling about something. He finds out that the bad feeling is they've lost all contact with Luke's forces, and because he doesn't want to worry Leia, he just takes off. Han, you should have at least left a note, because then Leia takes off after him and it all spirals from there. The Millennium Falcon ends up and down and in and out of Mindor. It gets stolen by Nick Rostu's girlfriend. He gets it back. But in typical Falcon fashion, it gets rather messed up along the way, but still, made it out okay. Han gets some nice quips in along the way. Chewie is also here. Chewie's dialogue is written out almost phonetically, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. I almost prefer when we have situations where Chewie growls and then Han just responds as though he understands what he was saying, because that's how it was in the movies. Leia is all force instincts and no training at this point. She senses that something's wrong with Luke. When Han takes off after Luke, she senses that the situation has got worse, and she follows. When they're on the surface of Mindor, and especially moving through the cave systems, Leia's like, I think we need to go this way, and Han's like, why? And she's like, I cannot explain it, I just have to go this way. For the most part, Leia's just here. She obviously loves Han, but at the same time, she also banteringly feuds with him at times. And once the big bad Cronal realizes that there's another Skywalker, he realizes, hey, this one is untrained and in a very prominent political position. I'm gonna target her instead. And what saves Leia is not just like her goodness, but her love for Han. That the whole time that Cronal is trying to get in her head, take her over, she's just thinking about how much she loves Han, how she wants to see Han again, and he can't even break in. In the first Coruscant Nights book, Jedi Twilight, Nick Rostu was being blackmailed by Darth Vader to try to hunt down the Jedi Jax Pavin. Nick got very badly wounded at the end of Jedi Twilight, and when I read the second book, I was like, oh, are we gonna find out what happened to Nick? No, nothing. Not a single word, which made me feel a little funny, because I was like, Nick was an important character in that book, and now it's just like no mentions of him at all. Clearly, though, he came out all right because he shows up here. He and his girlfriend, Aeona, had been hunting Cronal, and then Nick gets captured by him and turned into one of the pawns. And in fact, turned into Shadow Spawn, which is a pun because it's not Shadow Spawn, it's Shadow's pawn. Luke defeats him in a fight, and then Nick and Luke are working together to try to stop Cronal and stop everything. I like Nick. I like his attitude. I like how he talks about Anakin Skywalker as being one of the greatest Jedi of the Clone Wars. Big clearly does not know that Anakin became Darth Vader. I think it was just a good reminder that at this point in the timeline that people did not know that Anakin fell. And in fact, people who had met Anakin personally did not know that and still respect him as this greatly skilled Jedi. I liked Nick in Shatterpoint. I felt bad for Nick in Jedi Twilight, so I liked getting to see him here again and seeing him having a happy ending, reunited with Aeona and freed from Cronal's control. Aeona has teamed up with the fighters on Mindor. She's trying to get Nick out, but she doesn't even know where Nick is. And when she runs into Han and Leia, she steals the Millennium Falcon. Han is obviously very upset about that. Aeona is in the wrong, but you can also see why she did it, because they didn't have a ship, they didn't have any way to get off, and Mindor was going to be destroyed in the immediate future. But still, don't do that. Aeona is a redhead, and she seemed to be a redhead only so that we could get a remark from Luke at the very, very end that in Gepton's holodrama version that he was pairing off Luke and Aeona, and Luke's like, I don't even like redheads. And I'm like, Luke, but you do. I'm not just talking about Mara Jade, I'm also talking about Shira Bree. Like, you have a type. On the bad guy front, we have another pawn of Cronal, which is another character from Shatterpoint, Car Vastor. Vastor faced off against Mace Windu in Shatterpoint, and Mace beat him. Vastor's very interesting because he lost the ability to speak, but he can almost like force project his thoughts at people. And in Shatterpoint, he's just this almost personification of the jungle's darkness. And then Cronal turns him into one of his pawns. Was his first test subject for this taking over someone's body thing, but since Vastor can't talk or anything, he was like, I don't really want to do that. So he's mostly a big brute being puppeted by Cronal, but Luke saves him in the end. And Nick Rostu is sort of like distantly related to Car Vastor, so he and Aeona are like, all right, we'll grab him into our group. The big bad, of course, is not Shadow Spawn, because that was a trap. In fact, it's Cronal, who ends up being linked with a character named Black Hole, who showed up in the news strip comics. The back cover of the book talks about the Sith wanting fury on our heroes, but Cronal's not really a Sith. He was allied with Palpatine, but he's different. Cronal was one of the sorcerers of Rand in the Unknown Regions, and then he linked up with the Prophets of the Dark Side, who are in the Jedi Prince books, among other things. And then that got him the attention of Palpatine, and then he linked up with Palpatine, and he's all about the dark and dark sight. He can see the path that the universe must take because the dark will always win. And Cronal is like a shriveled, decrepit old man, so he wants to take over Luke Skywalker's body and just continue his dark chaos vendetta. Of course, Luke isn't easy to take over. He switched tracks. He's like, I'll take over Leia Organa instead. Leia is also not easy to take over. Cronal is ultimately, when facing off against Luke in this esoteric spiritual realm, like dissolved into nothing. But I guess he comes back in some way. Dark Empire sourcebook says this feels like the most Stover-like part of the book to me. Cronal's philosophy and the pawns and how he makes the pawns and how he's trying to take over Luke and Leia, but they are just like infused with light and he can't. And he's controlling the sentient rocks, but then Luke talks in this esoteric spiritual realm to the sentient rocks, and like purges them out of everyone, which is good because you really wouldn't want people running around with these like crystals in them going forward. It's very kooky mystic stuff, which does give a very Splinters of the Mind's Eye feel to me. But those 80s comics also got pretty weird at times, especially those Alan Moore stories. So this may be the hardest part for people to swallow about Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor, just how mystic it is. But I did find that interesting. And I also think it sort of ties in pretty well to the almost mythological stuff in the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, because I've always loved the very end of that novel. The dark is generous, and it is patient, and it always wins, but in the heart of its strength lies weakness. One lone candle is enough to hold it back. Love is more than a candle. Love can ignite the stars. And I think that's how Luke wins in the end, is because he is that one lone candle holding back the dark. Luke is going through a bit of a crisis in this book. As I said in the beginning, like, he didn't want to be a general, but Han sort of talks him into it. It's like, you know, this is an important role that you can play for the New Republic, and I can't play this role because I have to follow Leia around. So Luke is already not feeling convinced about what he's doing. And then to have walked into a trap of this magnitude where Cronal does not care if he destroys the entire system. He's in this for one thing, and he doesn't care if he kills all his forces and all of Luke's forces to achieve that. And Luke cares very much. It's not just that Luke is upset about losing rebel forces, but Luke is also upset about losing the Imperial forces. When he's facing off against all the pawns, he tries to remove their moon-shaped headdresses, and he does not know about the kill switch, and they're all dead as a result. The forces led by these elderly clone troopers surrender to him, primarily because of this Luke Skywalker and the Jedi's revenge holodrama that Cronal had created to try to push his viewpoint. They're helping evacuate the planet when Cronal basically turns them all into zombies. They have to be killed because they're mindlessly killing innocent people at this point. And then when Luke purges every one of the melt massive crystals, all those surrendered Imperials die as well. Luke has the weight of all these deaths on his back. And more than anything, Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor show us why Luke resigns his commission, why Luke's like, I gotta focus on being a Jedi. Because to be a leader, you have to be willing to accept failure and accept loss. And this ends up being way too much loss for Luke to be able to deal with. And when Cronal first tries to take Luke over, Luke feels sad and depressed and unable to see the light beyond all the dark. And he also struggles with this throughout the book, just trying to keep going, stop Cronal, save as many people as he can, but he also feels this nihilistic emptiness because of what he saw. And I think in a way, realizing that the Melt Massive was alive, was like this hive mind society, helps, because it's like, oh, wait, I just saw this all as blankness and darkness and emptiness, but actually it's alive and there's things here and I can help them too. So much of what Luke does in Luke Skywalker, The Shadows of Mindor, is seeing a situation where most people go, all right, I just gotta shoot my way out of here, gotta slash my way out of here, just kill them all. And Luke's like, but what if I didn't? What if I tried to save people? When fighting Vastor, you think, well, you just have to kill him. And I think it's the same approach that Luke takes with Vader in Return of the Jedi is, but I don't have to, and I don't want to. At that point, Vastor's being puppeted by someone else. This is not his choice. Sure, he's trying to rend Luke limb from limb, but he could be saved, and I'm going to do it. I think more than anything, that's what I really like about Luke Skywalker in The Shadows of Mindor, besides the feeling like it's an old story, even if there's a lot of Stover quirks to it, is how it's very dark, but then by the end, you feel this sense of hope. Things can be very bad. Things can look unbeatable, but there's light out there, and one candle can make a difference. But for this reread, I did notice some issues that I had with Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor. The first is that I don't think this framing device that Stover used for the story is necessary, because it definitely draws you in when you have Luke Skywalker saying, I want you to investigate me for war crimes because I killed 50,000 people. But then the way that the story plays out is a very straightforward Star Wars story. And then we get to the end and the debriefing, Luke's like, hey, that's not how it happened. That's not how it happened at all. And Gepton's like, yeah, well, I'm gonna sell it and make my own holodrama. Maybe I would have accepted that more if we had seen Gepton's tinkerings with the story, with the truth in the narrative itself, but we don't. The things that Luke and Gepton are talking about in the debriefing, we never see in the book. So I just think the framework of this is Gepton's version of what happened at the Battle of Mindor doesn't even work, and I wouldn't have included that because, again, that's not the story that we read. We seem to read a very straightforward retelling of this battle, and it's only in the debriefing that we're told that Gepton's investigation of it altered a lot of the facts, but like, we just learn about those in the debriefing. We never see that play out in the story itself. My second is just the way that the framing device also affects the narrative is that since we have the investigate me for war crimes, we're dropped like right in the middle of the story. We don't get a lot of setup beyond that mission where Rogue Squadron are trying to trap Shadow Spawn's forces to find out where they're based from, and then we jump right into the Battle of Mindor. And then even there, we don't really see people get out or the fallout from it. We know that the Tazban system's destroyed, the sun blows up and it destroys Mindor as well. The Imperials had previously already destroyed the other planet. But we don't see any of that, and in fact, we don't see Luke really getting rescued. We're in R2-D2's POV, and we see the ship that Nick had commandeered land on the little asteroid to get Luke and Vastor. But that's it. Immediately we're back in the debriefing, and Luke's just like, that's not how it really happened. So I guess what I'm saying is that because the whole book is one battle, I guess I was expecting more on the pacing side, like more setup, the battle, and then more of the denouement. But it basically felt like a lot of the book was like, moving to the climax, we get to the climax, and then the book like has a few more pages and ends, and that just felt a little bit jarring to me. And I guess my third issue with Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor is just that for a book which from the start we are told like 50,000 people died, I feel like the sense of scale doesn't really come across here. Cronal has an incredible amount of star defenders and such that he's throwing away. Luke is losing forces left and right, but I didn't get that sense of scale and like how much loss there was, I guess, because a lot of it felt like video game action where you're just being overwhelmed by everything around you and you can't like compute what's going on and what's happening. And maybe that ties into not particularly liking Cronal as a villain, because he just feels a lot like a evil D&D character. I think it's the way that no one physically faces off against him. He's always like hiding away, and everything is, again, in that metaphysical realm. I think that Vastor is a much better antagonist to me than Cronal because it's physical, and Cronal's all like, ooh, mumbly jumbly, brain wizardy stuff, and it's okay. I like how that leads Luke to revelations about things, but I don't particularly like Cronal as a whole. So, in short, Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor is a fairly short, fast-paced read that is basically just the Battle of Mindor. I liked getting to see Nick Rostu again. I thought that Hod and Lando had some fun scenes. I liked Luke working through his crisis of conscience here. And for the most part, I think Stover did a good job trying to bring back the feeling of the 80s Marvel comics and Splinter of the Mind's Eye and weird stuff like that. It does dip very much into that mystic, metaphysical realm, and your mileage may vary there. I also thought that maybe the weakest point of the novel for me was Cronal as the villain, because he's a real weird dude. But I enjoyed revisiting this book after all these years and finding it, for the most part, a fun read again. Well, a fun read that makes you rather depressed in the middle. So next time I'm going to be reading the first Clone Wars novel by Karen Miller, set within the world of the 3D animated show, Wild Space.